That is not what you're taught in any sales course. It's not what you're taught in business. You're supposed to lead with expertise. You're supposed to handle objections. No. Truth, honesty, a genuine response to a question that a client thought was important enough to ask. And that created trust a little bit right there in that moment.
Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Slayton, and I'm so glad you're here, where we provide practical ways to delight customers and do so consistently. This podcast is all about helping you accelerate the time it takes to embed the customer experience into your culture, earning the right to customer-driven growth. Well, I am so excited for our guest today, who I met in a most interesting way. I had just started a consulting practice focusing on helping small to medium-sized businesses with their strategy in general and revenue growth. And I started reading more about trust. And the reason was because I knew the people that I had worked with prior in corporate America the ones who did really well had this ability to build trust with their customers in a way that they were getting invited to their weddings. They were godparents for the kids. And I said, that's got to be one of the keys. I need to learn about this, and I need to actually do my best to instruct my clients to make sure they intentionally focus more on trust. And one of the books I picked up two great books on it. One was called Trust-Based Selling, and the other one was called The Trusted Advisor. And sure enough, there's this guy named Charles H. Green, who is the author. These are timeless gems that you get that really apply to anybody in any business and in real life outside of business. But particularly those of us in the customer experience world who are both trying to, if you're in that seat, that you have to persuade, you have to sell, you have to influence others. And generally, we don't have this authoritative badge that we can carry around with us. We have to do it by building trust and trusted relation. I can think of no one else who is more knowledgeable. Literally, he wrote the book on trust. And so I'm welcoming today, with great enthusiasm, my friend and mentor, Charlie Green.
Thank you, Mark. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so delighted. All right. So I can't wait to dig into this stuff because it's just things that maybe we do sometimes without really knowing it, but you can shed light on how we can do this once we get a grasp of what it is more intentionally and more focused to help us in our everyday lives, and those of us who are in the business world, particularly those who are trying to delight customers. So the first question I have has to do with relational risk, right? This idea of trust means if I'm going to trust you, I've got to take some risk. And gosh, there's a whole bunch of reasons in this world why I shouldn't trust anybody, much less you. And so can you help shed some light on how this whole thing might work just in terms of relational risk and how we might approach it?
Yeah, well, you put your finger on a very important thing. If there is no risk, there's no trust. I mean, trust is fundamentally about risk. If you think about any interaction between any two people that creates trust, starts with one of those two people taking a risk to trust the other person. Let's call that person the trustor. The other party is called the trustee. The trustee is the one who has to prove themselves trustworthy or not. And the trustor is an active role. The trustee is a passive role. And usually those of us, whether we're in CX roles or in professional services, we think of ourselves as the trustees. We want to be seen as trustworthy, but we forget that's not what initiates trust. Somebody has to take a risk. So in sales, the phrase is aggressively waiting for the phone to ring. Not a good strategy. If you want to create something, you have to flip over and take on the role of the trustor and figure out a way to take a risk on that other person, whether it's your potential client or your boss or somebody within your organization, whatever. And I'll borrow an idea. I mean, it was originally meant for the sales world, but I think it applies in any situation. It's what I call bring a risky gift. Imagine that you're invited to, a business colleague's for dinner for the first time at their house. And, you and your significant other on the way there, you stop at a liquor store, you buy a nice bottle of California Red or something, right? Because that's what you do. You bring a gift. But blah, 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 no big deal. They open it, they put it away. What if instead you were to say, honey, I think last year they went on vacation to Italy. What if we went and got a really nice bottle of Italian, pick your favorite Italian kind of wine, Chianti, a Barolo, something, and we tied it up with an Italian flag button, and we spent twice as much. That might be cool. Well, it would be cool. It'll certainly make an impression. Now, it's risky because you don't know. Maybe they're an alcoholic, or maybe they went to Spain. You got it wrong. It wasn't Italy. But you know what? It probably doesn't matter, because if they're alcoholics, this is not the first time somebody's brought a bottle of wine. And they'll probably say, thank you very much. We don't drink, but we'll put it aside for our next guests who do. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. And wow, Italy, you remember, that's really cool. Well, you, by taking a risk, consciously just extended the level of personalness or intimacy, call it whatever you want. And you showed that you're willing to take a risk on them for their benefit. And that has the natural human effect of them saying, wow, they trusted me. What do we do in return? We trust them a little bit. So you kind of initiate that trust cycle by figuring out a way to take a risk. Another way to do it is simply, if you're in the advice giving business of some form or another, you offer them some free advice, which might be wrong. You take a little risk. You go out and you say, listen, I could be wrong about this. You know more about your business than I do, but I've seen this, that, and the other. And it occurs to me that maybe this might be going on. Is that true? In other words, you put yourself out there. You're not trying to take no risk. You're not trying to only serve them up guaranteed 100% bulletproof advice. You're willing to put yourself out there on their behalf. And you could be wrong, and you acknowledge it. But the fact of you acknowledging it puts you in the trust store role, and it kicks off that trust dynamic. So that's the idea.
So I got it. And the gift, we want to be clear, and maybe I'm asking for clarification. The gift isn't, hey, you need to buy my IT solutions. That's a gift to you, right?
Yeah. It's not that kind of thing. It could be any little thing.
Yeah.
And it's not about giving them something valuable, for money, or giving freebies or cents off promotions. No, it's offering something of potential value to them without strings attached, and recognizing that it might be inappropriate. You're willing to take that risk in greater service to them.
I like that. Bring a risky gift. And the other thing, as you are sharing the story, it also tells me as the receiver of that you've been thinking about me, and maybe you care about me.
Exactly right. A very similar thing is we all get on Zoom calls with people we haven't met.
Yeah.
And most of us know we should look them up on LinkedIn before we get on the call. Most of us don't do it. But even if we do it, we find some way, I noticed you got a BA in, philosophy or something. Well, blah, blah. Okay, go one better. And notice, they live in Minneapolis. And look at the weather report. And I saw you guys had a big snowstorm in Minneapolis last night, didn't you? Were you in that? What was it like? I mean, you actually care enough to look at and you don't have to bring it up, but you're open to the possibility, so that if the conversation goes that way, you did care enough to look for something interesting. And it's not bulletproof. You're going out there a little bit. You're being a little bit more personal than they are, because you're willing to take that first risk.
And what I love about what you're saying, Charlie, is this is not a huge investment in time, and generally not money. Correct. It's really, you're taking a few minutes to, that illustration you just shared, it's looking into current events and figuring out, hey, if we're going to have a conversation about this, I might look at a relevant story or the Wall Street Journal or something related to their industry, and just get up to date on it, so you can say you're not just showing up to sell your products.
Yeah, and again, you put your finger on another important point. One of the biggest myths of all, we've all heard this one: trust takes time.
Mm,
or a variation on the theme. Trust takes a long time to build and only a moment to destroy. Both of those are myths.
mm,
It generally does not take a lot of time. What it takes is courage. It takes a willingness to put yourself out there and, touch on a subject that not everybody would necessarily go that way. And by the way, the other part of that, trust takes a moment to destroy. Not if the trust is deep. If it's
mm.
shallow, then yeah, it only takes a moment. But if you've established a deep amount of trust and you make a mistake, they're not going to dump you. They're going to say, "Hey, that's not like you. That was out of character. What's going on? I thought you were trustworthy. We don't do that again." So cut you slack if they trust you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You mentioned that because one of the metrics that's used often by the XM Institute is when you have clients who are loyal to you, customers,
Right.
clients who are loyal to you. The correlation to that, the drivers of that often have to do with things like emotional connection.
Right.
Whether or not they were successful in their transactions with you, what they came to achieve, and if it was easy. Those are three things that are commonly driving loyalty. But the benefit of loyalty often is described as not just referrals, which are important to
Right.
many businesses, and share of wallet, an increase in share of wallet. They're going to be repeat customers, but this idea of being more forgiving
Yeah.
when you mess up.
You're right. That totally jives with all the stuff that I've done.
Hmm.
They'll cut you some slack. They'll give you a break. And which, by the way, also means, related to that, they won't make you jump through all the hoops. You don't have to do all the check boxes. They'll wave you through in certain ways if they trust you.
I love the example that you share, which is the two different sides of that. The trust that has to do with decisioning. So one was decision by committee versus decision. Yeah, right. I can't remember the exact phraseology of it, but your decisions fly through if there's high trust, and
Right.
if not, they can grind to a halt.
Yes. Yep. Very true. And people don't usually say it's because I don't trust you. They
Right.
usually say, "Oh, your price was too high." That's the universal non-emotional excuse for what they really mean is, we don't feel the chemistry, But, they say the price was too high. Well, nobody argues with that.
Right.
The conversation stopper.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. All right. So when we talk about trust, there's different words, different terminology around this idea of do I trust you? Do you trust me? And two of those words are trust versus trustworthiness.
Yes.
Can you break that down for
Yeah.
the audience? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give you three words, actually: trust, trusting, and trustworthiness. Trust is let's say trust, I'm using the word as a noun here. A state of trust, a relationship of trust, a trust-based relationship. That's trust, the noun. That's the end result. That's the description of how things are between us. Then trusting, or to trust as a verb, is like we talked before, to trust somebody. I trust you, you trust me. That is an act of risk-taking. It's an act of courage. It's an act of, putting yourself in harm's way of possibly being hurt. Then finally, trustworthiness, which is an adjective. It's the attribute of the trustee, the person who wishes to be trusted. They want to be seen as trustworthy. And you can break trustworthiness down. We have a thing called the trust equation that looks at four components, as you know, Mark, of trustworthiness. But those are the dynamic. A trustor has to trust, as in the verb. A trustee has to be trustworthy, as in the adjective. And if those two meet and connect and click, then boom, the level of trust, the noun, the relationship increases. So that's how I look at those three words.
Okay, so I would like to dig into it since you brought it up and let others know what the components are. But before we do, we talk about trustworthy. Everybody wants to be trustworthy,
right?
When we talk about it, can a brand be trustworthy, or is it more of an individual thing?
Yes and no. There are certain components of trustworthiness. You kind of have to break that apart. And some of them can be attributes of a company or a brand or a product, as well as of people. And some of them, no, they are personal. They're strictly individual. So you want to break that out for a second? You want to go there? You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
Oh, yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the what we call the trust equation, which should really be the trustworthiness equation. And very simply, it's C plus R plus I over S. And those words stand for credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by self-orientation. The first two, everybody pretty much understands. Credibility, that's expertise, competence, smart, you got credentials, all that. And then reliability is even easier. It's dependable. Do you do what you said you do? Have you got a track record? Those are familiar to people. You can come up with metrics for them. You can come up with numbers and measurements. I mean, reliability, easy. You got a track record, a percentage hit rate or dependability rate, delivery rate, whatever.
Right.
The other two variables, the intimacy and low self-orientation, those are much squishier, more emotional. The first two, credible, reliable, I think that applies to a brand. Intimacy one, it's a little different. I mean, we say, we have an intimate relationship with Apple or we love their products or something, but it's not the same thing. Being in love with a product or a company, yeah, we say that, but it's very different than having an intimate relationship with a human being. They're just, and by the way, you can't measure these things with the same meticulousness and cold-blooded numbers that you can with credibility or reliability. How do you measure intimacy? It's a feeling. How do you behavioralize it? How do you teach it? It's a firmness of your handshake. It's a look in the eye. It's a pause a half a second before you answer. It's a raised eyebrow. I mean, you can describe them behaviorally, but it's kind of a waste of time. And in the denominator, that self-orientation factor, what that means really is, who are you paying attention to, yourself or the other person? Because if you're wrapped up in your own neurotic self, worrying about how you're going to appear, you're highly self-oriented. That's going to reduce your trustworthiness. We all know when we're talking to somebody and they're not paying attention, they're all wrapped up in themselves, it's a turnoff, right? So to be low self-orientation, which is a good thing, you have to have the sort of inner ego strength to say, I'm not worried about myself here. I can pay attention to this other person and get into what they're thinking and where they're at. And we all know what that's like too. It's fantastic when somebody actually listens to you and pays attention to you and follows your thought pattern and goes where you go and asks good questions. So those, I think, are much more, a company doesn't do that. A brand doesn't do that. A person does that. So trustworthiness is partly, a brand attribute and partly a personal attribute, mostly depending on which component of trustworthiness you're talking about.
Okay. So we've got three components on the top of this equation, and then we've got one on the bottom. Can you talk a little bit about how the relationship works, maybe mathematically in the calculations, or just how we should think about it?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's interesting. It's a little bit of a side note. When we borrowed the equation from somebody else and we changed it around and I think improved it. But what was intriguing was there was a factor in the denominator, because mathematically you could have inverted that last number and just made it A plus B plus C plus D. It would have been boring. And I think a lot of the reason the biggest, most popular component in both the books you mentioned was actually the trust equation. And I've come to think it was because we expressed it in terms of three factors in the numerator and one in the denominator. It gets everybody to think, gee, one goes the other way. How does that work? I think we also picked self-orientation because at the time, the three of us who wrote the book thought, well, that's probably the most important one. So let's give it its own, triple weighting in the denominator. Well, come to find out, if you do actually compare those four variables, the strongest one by a small margin turns out to be intimacy, not self-orientation. So, I mean, technically, I guess we were wrong. It doesn't matter because it's all just how you express things arithmetically. But for your listeners, the most powerful component is intimacy. The second most powerful turns out to be self-orientation. So both of those two factors that have this emotional human component, those are the most powerful. And when I say that, I'm talking about statistical analysis, regression equations that we did on the data of 70,000 people who took this thing as a self-assessment tool. And, so it's the emotional components of trust that turn out to be the most powerful, not the credentials, not your brilliance, not your track record, not the value you create. It's like, does that person say, wow, they get me? If they say that, that's a stronger form of trust than all the other stuff.
So to be clear, like the credibility and reliability, which really has to do with your expertise, your credentials, and the reliability is, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you keep your promises? Those things are not as weighty, and when it comes to trust, as the two other ones that are related to. But you would probably agree that in many cases they are a ticket to the dance.
Well, that's a good way to put it. The credible, reliable thing, the rational stuff, that is a ticket to the dance, to use your thing. It gets you in the door.
Yeah.
Credentials are why we say, okay, you can come in. You have an MBA from so-and-so, or you have a doctorate, or you studied at so-and-so. That'll get you in the door. That'll get you a meeting. That'll get you a seat at the table. Then the other stuff comes to bear. So there is a sequencing, and you're absolutely right. We tend to lead. It works best when you lead with the non-emotional stuff, and you close or you follow up with the more emotional components.
Well, this is just so fascinating, Charlie. I hear it again. I was working with you for so long, and just am fascinated. But every time I hear it, it just creates a whole bunch of sparks. And I would like to, when we come back, we're going to take a little break. Talk a little bit more about intimacy. I want to dig into that because there's some real CX implications there.
Oh, good.
And then I also would love for you to share, if you don't mind, the story, the sandpaper story.
Oh, yeah, sure.
With our listeners, when we come back from the break, you will love this story. I did. It was kind of, it had some sort of a twist for me, was not expecting. So when we come back from this short break, Charlie's going to share a little bit more about intimacy and the components of it and how it plays out, how maybe you can, if you understand it, can leverage it in your day-to-day life, and also share a great story about how it plays out, real-life application. You are listening to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I'm Mark Slayton, your host. And if you're just starting out on your CX journey and need help with CX strategy and roadmap, or maybe you've been on your journey and just need help getting to the next level, I've walked the walk as a CX practitioner and know the real-world challenges you're facing. Let's put our heads together and jointly define the problem that needs solving. I'd love to see if there's a way I can help. You can reach me at empoweredcx.com. And now back to the show. All right, we are back now, and I'm just so excited to have my guest, Charlie Green, author, speaker, and just one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to this topic of trust in the world. And I want to go back to this equation that he shared with, called the trust equation, which was credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation, saying that the research lately has shown that intimacy is actually more weighty than self-orientation. And I want to dig into that a little bit because I'm pretty sure, help me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure one of the components, as you define intimacy, is empathy.
Yeah. Yes,
empathy.
That's a good way to put it. There's a lot of overlap. Vulnerability would be another word. If you were to do Venn diagrams, they'd be overlapping each other quite a bit. Yeah. I think of intimacy as mostly safety, emotional security, emotional safety. So if I let's say I'm trustworthy to you, what that means is that, or you're trustworthy to me, let's say. It means if I share something with you, you're going to know whether to laugh or not. You're not going to laugh inappropriately. And I feel comfortable about that. And furthermore, that if I do share this thing with you, you're going to know whether to pass it along to somebody else or not. and I feel comfortable with your judgment. And if you do pass along to somebody else, I feel comfortable that you're going to handle it in the right way. You're not going to put me in a bad light. You're not going to put me in trouble. You're not going to tell tales out of school. I trust you means I feel safe and secure sharing certain kinds of feelings, emotions, knowledge, whatever with you. I'm not going to be, abused, violated, taken advantage of. So I think that's maybe the best definition. Now, that has a lot to do with empathy, certainly has vulnerability, but at root, I think maybe security is the best word. I feel safe with someone.
Gotcha. Okay. Because I think what I'm hearing also is there's two sides to that, but it's definitely emotional safety is on one side. It's like, do you have a vault?
Yeah.
Right. Do you have a vault? Can I trust you with what I share in terms of you know when it shouldn't be shared any further?
Right.
Yeah. And then the other part is, like you said, it's like a Venn diagram. The other component of that vulnerability is empathy is in there. And that is like understanding what the other person's thinking and feeling. I don't necessarily have to agree with them.
Right, exactly.
Right.
All you have to do is to be able to say, ouch. Or, it's one word. If you say it right, if somebody says, oh, I'm going through, and my mother was just in a car accident, the right response is not, oh, really? How did that go? No, it's to say, oh my God, really? Oh my gosh, what happened? To express empathy, that's what you do. You acknowledge, you don't have to agree with it, but you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah. So it's sometimes I'm just going to want to repeat what you just said there, because that's so important. I think it may only take one word, even just
exactly.
Even a sound,
wow is a whole sentence.
Wow is a whole sentence, right? So the reason it connects here is because we think about much of design thinking is in the CX sphere of how we change the experience to improve it for customers. Right. It's one way, it's the current state, and we design what we think the future state ought to look and feel like for the clients.
Right.
And then we redesign it. And in that process, it's helpful to empathize with what the clients are going through.
Yeah, for sure.
Journey mapping and other design thinking, there's actually an empathy map tool empathy map tool, which is really what are the clients feeling and thinking at a particular stage of their experience with you. Right. And then you can, if you're really trying to dig into this, because it takes you out of your shoes and it puts you in the customer's shoes.
Exactly. Yeah. That's perfect. Good stuff.
And I think if there's a way to build trust and to become more trustworthy, that whole idea of trying your best to understand what they may be going through, what they're feeling, would you agree would be a good avenue to get there?
Absolutely. And honestly, even if you don't get it exactly right, if it shows that you're making an effort to try and understand, that you get credit for that even.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's very valuable.
Okay. Love it. Hopefully those of you listening, there was a gem in there. Some of you, I can tell you, my wife empathy is one of her number one strengths. That wasn't in my top 10-ish. But I love her and learn from her all the time about it. And it comes naturally. Doesn't mean you can't learn how to apply it.
Right.
And become more aware of it. And
absolutely you can.
And boy, the payoff here, as you said earlier, is to becoming more trustworthy in the process, right?
Huge. Yeah. The payoff is enormous. Yes.
Okay. So years ago, when I first met you, not too long after we first met, I got a chance to hear you speak, and you share this story, which is a true story that happened in your own life. So aside from being a great story, it was your story, and it was at a pretty interesting inflection point in your life. So would you mind sharing?
Sure.
the sandpaper story?
Yeah, I was a newly promoted manager in a management consulting firm based out of Boston. And I was at that stage in my career where you had to learn how to begin to sell, business development. And I got my first lead one day. It was with an abrasives company called the Norton Company in Worcester, Massachusetts, just 60 miles down the road from Boston. Abrasives means grinding wheels and sandpaper. It doesn't get any more basic than sandpaper, gluing rocks on the paper. Anyway, the meeting is with the VP of abrasives, the marketing VP for abrasives. And my boss agreed to come along on this triumphal sales call with me. I didn't really want him there, but he insisted. So what are you going to do? So we go to this meeting. It's 8 a.m. And the usual ritual, you pour coffee, you exchange business cards, you sit down and chit chat for a minute. And then the client looks me in the eye and he leans into me across the table and he says, "Tell me, Mr. Green, what experience do you have doing marketing studies for industrial consumables?" And I thought, industrial, what? And then I immediately thought, oh, he means sandpaper. Okay, got it. Momentary feeling of triumph, right? But then I thought, oh my God, how many marketing studies have we done for sandpaper? I was pretty sure, even though this is pre-database days, the answer was 0, probably never. So I'm scrambling in my brain rapidly under high adrenaline to figure out, how do I deal with the fact that we've never done anything like that? I need to say something like, well, not exactly, but we've done this, that, and the other. And fortunately, my boss saw the deer in the headlight look in my face and he interjected. He leaned in. And remember, the question was, what experience do you have doing marketing studies for industrial consumables? My boss leaned in and he said, none that I can think of. What else would you like to talk about? And I thought, oh my God, you don't say that, for heaven's sakes, of all the dumb answers. But the client's reaction was instant. He leaned back in his chair, threw his arms up, and he said, shoot, hardly anybody's done sandpaper marketing. What else have you got that we could talk about? And I realized at that point, I could actually say all the things I was going to say because we had admitted that we had no experience. So what seemed like the most risky thing in the world, which was no experience at all, turned out to be the trump card because we were honest. Honesty trumps expertise. And my boss knew that. And he just put it out there. He didn't, by the way, he didn't say, none, but we can get it for you. No, the point is not we can get it for you. The point is you ask me a question. Do we have an experience? The answer is no. Where do you want to go from there? And I mean, wow. I mean, that is not what you're taught in any sales course. It's not what you're taught in business. You're supposed to lead with expertise. You're supposed to handle objections. No. Truth, honesty, a genuine response to a question that a client thought was important enough to ask. And that created trust a little bit right there in that moment. And that's that story.
I love it. And it's just so hard for me because I'm such a solution oriented person, and
we all are.
Trying to break out of that and just to be so vulnerable, the word you used earlier, and say,
right.
Gosh, I don't know.
Well, it's funny. I think I'm like you. I think we're all like that. But we weren't that way in kindergarten. If you ask us a first grader, they're going to give you an honest answer. I think we have been miseducated throughout the highly developed, analytical, rational, data-driven system of education that we have, which has its purposes. But unfortunately, it has taught us that somehow we're not supposed to say, I don't know. But I don't know turns out to be one of the most trust-creating things you can say. Who's going to lie to you about that? Nobody. When somebody says, I don't know, you can bet it's a pretty honest statement.
Right.
And somebody just told you the truth.
So true. So true. I think about like in fourth, by the time I got to fourth, fifth grade, for me to raise my hand, I would have had to have been lock, stock, barrel. No, I had the right answer.
Right. Exactly.
And what you're talking about here is in order to build to trust, and in order to become more trustworthy, you have to do something that's really paradoxically different.
That's exactly right. It's paradoxical. It seems like a paradox. Yeah. Yet if you go back to basic roots of before we learned how to pretend and lie and all that good stuff, we knew to be honest and truthful, and it still works. The flip is not believable. If you have an answer for every question, I don't believe you. because you don't have an answer for every
Right.
question. So you're lying to me when you pretend to be.
Right.
You pretend to be an expert for all things. I often ask my sales clients, I say, would you ever recommend a client to a competitor? And if they say no, I immediately think, well, that means you think you can solve every client's problem. I don't believe you.
Mm.
The right answer is, yeah, sometimes I would if it was right for them. If I thought somebody else had a better answer, I should recommend them to a competitor. That would be the truthful answer.
And just so counterintuitive to even think about recommending a competitor.
Right.
But the paradox there is that if you do that, you're going to probably earn more trust.
Absolutely. And whenever that person needs something in your wheelhouse, they're going to remember. They're going to say, that guy told me the truth. I bet if I call them up and ask them, can they help me with this problem? They'll tell me the truth again. And if they tell me, yes, they can, I'm going to believe them.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so fascinating. Let me play off of that topic of just being vulnerable, being willing to admit you don't have all the answers. When it comes time for you to help a client out, and when we talk about ways that you can add value, and this, I think about it ways that you can add value. Both, I'm thinking particularly about intra-organizational dynamics. So if you're trying to build any CX, I mentioned earlier about our need to win through influence, to move the ball forward through persuasion and building relationships and building trust. But how can we add value when we're so in tune with trying to solve problems for them?
Yeah.
Can you help?
Yeah, I think you're describing, it's a pretty general issue, whether you're in CX or sales or just a regular person talking with others. If your mindset is problem solving, then you see yourself as a problem solver, and you're driven. And I mean, it's not a bad motivation, but it means every hammer finds a nail. Everything looks like a hammer, right? And they don't really want problem solving as much as they want to feel that you're helping them define and solve a problem. So the answer, kind of internal psychology, I think, is to say, I'm going to help this person figure out exactly the right problem, and together we're going to define the problem, and together we're going to explore what the right answer is. And if we're both good together, we'll figure it out. And if I'm not good enough, they're not good enough, we're not good enough, then we won't. But let's try. Let's dig in here together. So figuratively, we have to put ourselves on the same side of the table and have an open discussion with that person and say, let's really figure out exactly what the problem is here. Tell me what you've been thinking. Help me understand that. Let me tell you a few things I've thought. And you begin to really collaborate in a very open way. Once you do that, then you're both going to bring to bear all the perspectives that each of you have to help define the right problem. Once you define the right problem, that's actually the harder. That's where the real value add comes, jointly agreeing on a problem definition. If you get that right, the solution becomes fairly transparent, fairly obvious. So to connect it back to value adding, the key thing is to collaboratively define the problem rightly together. And then jointly explore, now we figured out what the problem is, let's talk about whether what we have helps you or not. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom in that, Charlie, because it is also another one of these things to me that is very counterintuitive.
Yes, it is.
Because, we feel like, going back to the sandpaper story, what was going through your head was, I'm the smartest person in the room and I'm going to prove it to you. And but by doing that, then you will, I'll win your business or something. And the truth is, if you're trying to establish trust and build relationships, wouldn't people much more significantly want to jointly define the problem and then collaboratively work together on the solution? You may have more experience and knowledge in a particular area.
Yeah. Which is why they sought you out, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Or in the case of customer experience management, sometimes we're seeking them out because we're making
Right.
change. We're change agents, and they really don't want us to be there.
True.
So perhaps this approach, again, counterintuitive, but it might actually be more effective.
I think it is. I'll give you another small story, another true story that kind of ties together some of what we've been talking about. My daughter has two sons, so I'm a grandfather, twice over, two boys. When the first one was born, you picture my daughter and her husband, they're both, overachiever, young adults, etc. So they had the kid, and the kid's 2 weeks old, and suddenly he's got a fever and he's got a temperature and he's screaming and crying. And new parents, put yourself in their shoes, they're freaking out. So they call up the pediatrician, which they pre-selected by credibility, reliability, all that good stuff. And now I go into imagination. Imagine they go to the pediatrician and the pediatrician listens to them for 10 seconds and say, yeah, there's a lot of that going around. Take this pill and this ointment and call me tomorrow. Bye. I know my daughter, and she's not that different than all of us. She's not going to buy that. She's going to say, wait a minute, what about restless baby leg syndrome? What about this thing I read on WebMD? That's not enough. So we don't accept that. And even if we sought out that particular doctor because they're the most qualified, the most credentialed, we're not going to accept that. Instead, unfortunately, most child pediatricians know this. A good pediatrician is going to say, does the baby do this when you do that, when you touch them this way? Have you noticed anything about their sleeping behavior? Have you noticed any of that? What else have you noticed that I should be hearing about? And then they listen to all that and they say, you know what? There's a lot of this going around. Take these 2 pills and this ointment and call me tomorrow. Then we accept it. Why? Because they paid attention, because they were curious, because they collaborated with us in defining what the problem was rather than pronouncing as the expert what the problem was. It's the same problem in both cases. But the client accepts it in one case and not in the other because we're not looking for an appeal to authority. We're looking for somebody to work with us to make us feel good that we got customized, personalized advice. That's the value. Otherwise you can get it on the web, put in the symptoms and AI is getting better and better at telling you what the solution is, but we don't trust it in that same way.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned customized, personalized, because with the advent of AI and other technology, there's an easy temptation to roll down, hey, this list of, we can cut cost, we can speed up, we can be more efficient if we leverage technology, and
which is true,
which is all true. But what I was hearing and doing focus groups with customers at a bank I was working for, was that they said, we do want you to have suitable technology. We want you to have adequate technology, but don't ever take away those relationships, because that's what makes you better than ABC Bank.
Right. Yeah, I remember this first became clear to me, probably decades ago. I was buying a Dell computer, a laptop online, and they had just begun to come out with these, chat bot expertise things and basically AI. And you could pick all these characteristics and sort through computers and pricing, but there would always come a point when you had a question. And if you're sitting around in your apartment in your pajamas, whatever, and you can do all the surfing, which is great. I don't have to talk to anybody going through all the crap, but there comes a point when I think, how do I think about this? Dell had a live chat person. And the ability to have that together with all the transactional, bloodless, cold data analytics, the combination is what's really killer. So the problem we get with AI is we think it's a substitute for relationships. No, it's its own thing. You remember when ATMs first came out, or I do anyway. And the immediate thought was, oh, thank God, I don't have to wait in the teller line anymore. Right. That doesn't mean I don't want somebody at the bank. I just don't want to have to talk to them to get cash.
Right.
I don't want to have to talk to the person at Starbucks to get a cup of coffee if I don't feel like talking to them. But if I do feel like talking to them, I want them to be a sentient human being who can carry on a conversation or solve a problem. So I think the challenge for all of us in business is to balance these two. And the better we get at AI, welcome. I love seeing things automated. But remember, there's always some component of an interaction that's going to be that personal thing. And we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well said, Charlie. And that's something. I'm glad we hit the digital transformation and that when it comes to trust, because I think you hit the nail on the head for everybody based on what I've heard from a cross section of customers is, we need to be able to do both, but don't lose that personal, tailored, customizable, approach, because the big guys, whether it's financial services or engineering, manufacturing, technology, it doesn't matter. The big players in there often lose sight of that, and then you end up being just a number.
That's right.
And the smaller organizations who don't lose sight of that have a strategic advantage. They do,
and it's not guaranteed, because I don't think there's anything that would prevent a Chase Manhattan Bank from incorporating that component. They just don't do it.
Right.
But they could.
Well, they absolutely could. And the truth is, the bigger you scale and the larger you get, the more siloed you tend to get.
Yeah, that's
right. Naturally, it's just natural occurrence. Nobody. It's not malintent. It just happens as you grow.
Right. That's true.
Terrific. I just can't tell you how much I enjoyed having you on the show.
Mark, it's a pleasure. I've so enjoyed getting reconnected with you and having this kind of conversation. Thank you.
And if our listeners wanted to either get a hold of you or how would they best reach you?
I no longer run the company that I founded. It's called Trusted Advisor Associates. They can check out the website, trustedadvisor.com. Or if you want to get in touch with me, use my email address, cgreen, that's CGREEN, @trustedadvisor.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Charlie, for being on the show. It was terrific.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Delighted Customers podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for any resources and links mentioned on the show. You can find those on my website, empoweredcx.com. That's empoweredcx.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you please subscribe to it? That way you can get all future podcasts as soon as they're available. And remember, when we serve others well, we make a difference in the world.